Hey guys, there's this movie where a guy can become a spider, and he throws heads with a guy who can become an octopus. It's pretty lit. Following up from my last video, we'll be going over the sequel to Spider Guy Jr. This is actually one of the best superhero movies, and even one of the best movies in general, so you know it was a W. The movie starts out with similar played out graphics as the first one, but this time, it shows some pictures from the last movie, in case you forgot or something. Then we hear Pedro once again go over his heart on for the girl, but he can't do anything about it, because he can't let her know about him doing the most in his spare time. But his boss is tired of his nonsense, because he hasn't been on point, and he tells him that if he doesn't run this quick mission to deliver pizzas, then it's up for him. So he does the dash across the block in order to get there, but when that isn't working out, he transfers into the spider guy, which makes another guy think he finessed the pizzas, but he's not about it, so there's nothing to worry about. But then spider guy sees two fetuses acting up and vibing in front of a truck, so he has to bail them out before they end up on the papers. Then he gets the pizzas back because he almost finessed by another guy. When Pedro finally gets to his destination, he has to do too much in order to get out of the cut after he changed, but it turns out it was all for nothing because it was too late and the woman behind the counter isn't trying to pay for it. So when Pedro goes back to work, the boss tells him to get lost because he can't do his job right, and as if that wasn't lame enough, the newspaper guy also gets on his ass for having useless pictures instead of ones with the spider guy. But Pedro tells him it's because the newspaper guy tried to get everyone on spider guy's ass, so he closed off contact. But some woman is there to provide support, so that's nice. Then at college, Pedro is once again taking L's as all of his classmates proceed to hoe him outside, and he bumps into his professor who lets him know that class is over and he's been falling off and he needs to do a paper. When Pedro tells him he's going to do a paper on some scientist, the professor tells him that if he doesn't do it by a certain time, then he's done. Then Pedro gets to his aunt's crib and he finds his associates there because it turns out it's his birthday, and he has a little talk with his friend about whatever. Then the friend lets him know that he has contact with the scientist, so now Pedro has a clear path to do the paper on him. But then he gets in his feelings over the fact that he knows the spider guy, because you know, he thinks that's why his dad's on his shirt. But then he backs off because he says Pedro's the only family left, and his aunt brings out the cake and they have a gay old time. Later on, Pedro sees his aunt's out of commission, and for a second there, she forgot she was a fossil. Then Pedro tells her that he's seen the bank out on her ass, but she's not trying to hear it, and makes him take some money from her. That gets in her feelings over the uncle being gone, so that's sad. Then Pedro talks to the girl about life or something, and she tells him to watch her play, you know, because she's an actress I guess. And Pedro struggles to get it off his chest that he wants to pipe her, but it doesn't work out. As to make things worse, she lets him know that she's taken, so now hope is once again lost. So Pedro tells her that he'll steal the play because he needs to have a reverse course. Then Pedro has to talk to his landlord about rent because he's a broke boy behind on his bills. When Pedro gets back to his own crib, he spends the night listening to 12 over the intercom because I guess that's how he gets the job on the ops when he turns into Spider Guy. The next day, Pedro meets up with his friend and the scientist, and the friend leaves them alone. And when they're by themselves, the scientist gets on Pedro because he doesn't do shit with his mind and tells him that smart niggas have an obligation to get off their asses. Then the scientist tells Pedro about his new invention to help the city, and when Pedro tells him that something like that could send everyone to the next dimension, the scientist gets in his feelings and tells him that he got this. Also, the scientist's wife is in the background providing support, and she asks Pedro who he wants to have kids with, but he dodges the subject because that's confidential information. Then the scientist and his wife do that weirdo nonsense where they overly love each other in front of strangers, and they tell Pedro how they met, as if anyone cares. Also, the scientist tells Pedro that in order to open any girl's legs, he needs poetry. So later on, Pedro's reading some poems while getting his clothes washed, but he has to watch out because it's his spider guy fits, and he can't let the guys around find out who he is. Then Pedro prepares to get ready to see the girls play, and you know, things are looking cool because the girls looking forward to seeing Pedro. But then of course niggas are tweaking on the road, and the whip behind Pedro almost puts him on the news, and he uses his superpowers to bail himself out, and he has to brush it off to the fetuses who saw him do it. It turns out the guys in the whip are off one, and they start busting at 12, which makes a bunch of 12's whips flip over and almost hit a group of randos, and Spider Guy has to save them with his web. Then Spider Guy gets in the ops asses and puts them away. Meanwhile, the girl's in her feelings because Pedro hasn't shown up. When Pedro gets there, he parks illegally, but his testicles are too big for him to care. Then he tries to enter the theater place, but the bum-ass guard won't let him in, so he has to fuck off out of the building. After the play is over, he sees that girl talking to her friend from far away, and also the guy that she was talking about, so now he knows the mission has been failed. Then Pedro does the dash in his Spider Guy outfit to see where 12 is trying to go, but he ends up busting his ass in the process because his powers randomly stop working, and he ends up landing on some pipes. Then he has some awkward ride with a rando in an elevator, and you can tell Spider Guy's had enough at this point with all the L's he's been taking lately. Then Pedro walks into the night because the day has been lost. The next day, Pedro's sitting down in class and later leaves a call to the girl, trying to explain why he couldn't be asked to show up, but it's lame because he can't tell her the full truth. Then when the light cuts out, he confesses to being the spider guy to get it off his chest. Later on, the scientist is doing his presentation, and he puts on some machine with his arms to do the most. Then he explains how he's controlling the arms with his mind, and that there's something on his neck that keeps him in control I guess, and he uses a rare material to do a fusion, so it's a giant W for humanity or something, because now niggas can make sons. While he's working on the machine, it starts to tweak and starts messing up the room, and when the guy tells him to shut it down, he refuses because he says it'll fix itself, but then the machine starts really doing the most, and Spider-Guy shows up to save the friend, but he's still hurt over the last movie, so he's an ungrateful hoe. So now the machine is acting up so hard that it ends up breaking the windows and murders the scientist's wife, and also destroys the end of the scientist's neck, which gave him control. So Spider-Guy eventually manages to shut it down. Later on, the paramedics get there, and the friend is hurt because Spider-Guy was caught bailing him out, and also the scientist failed, which makes him look bad. Then it gets to the hospital, where doctors are about to work on the scientist, but his arms aren't trying to go out like that, so they start wetting up the block and putting all the doctors on tombstones. Then they lift off the blindfolds from the scientist, so he can see how useless he's been, and he gets in his feelings and goes to some place in the water where the rest of his experiments is. After this, the newspaper guy tries to find a name for the scientist, and then Rando suggests Professor Octagon, which the newspaper guy shits on, just to come up with it seconds later, because randos don't matter. Then Pedro walks through, and the newspaper guy isn't feeling him, because he fails to get a picture of Spider-Guy doing his job, but it's okay, because he can take pictures of the astronaut's son. Then Pedro asks for a raise, and the newspaper guy laughs in his face, because it's a wonder he's being compensated at all, and he tells him to vacate the premises. So Professor Octagon is in his feelings over his wife being a pack, and his work being all for nothing, and he wants to leave his body. But then the arms convince him that he can remake the experiment because it can still work, but he needs to finesse the funds to get it running. And he tries to fight back at first, but he has a weak will, so he just goes along with it like a follower. Then it shows Pedro with his aunt, because he's trying to get something with the uncle's funds, but the guys at the bank tell that's not gonna happen. Then Professor Octagon shows up to finesse the bank, and it ends up breaking the table the aunts and Pedro were on, giving him a chance to piss off and do what needs to be done, while some nobody takes a cheap shot like the lame he is. While Professor Octagon is trying to get to the funds, he gets harassed by Spider-Guy, so he starts throwing coins at him, and Spider-Guy tries to go on the offensive, but of all times, this is when his power starts to act up again. So Professor Octagon throws hands with the Spider-Guy, and when he walks outside, he gets confronted by 12, so he finesses the aunt, so 12 won't blast on him, and when Spider-Guy tries to get her back, he just drops her, because his wickedness is now on another level, and they throw hands again, and some buildings get ruined, and he threatens to murk the aunt, but the aunt actually does something, and gets saved by the Spider-Guy, so that's cool. Later on, Pedro's at a kickback taking pictures, and his friend is still in his feelings over the scientist thing not working out, and also Spider-Guy's existence. But before they can continue, the newspaper guy calls him to take a bunch of pictures, and also Loki exposes the mayor, which was an L. So it's finally time to introduce his newspaper guy's son, and it turns out that's the girl he's been seeing, so Pedro is hurt. Then Pedro tries to talk to the girl about him being MIA for all her performances, but she doesn't want to hear it, because everyone else had the time to see her, so she's done with him. Also the friend walks up, because he's off one, and he starts whining about the fact that Pedro's cool with the Spider Guy, and blames Pedro for his dad being on the news, because he said the dad likes him more or something, and also he blames him for the girl leaving him, and owes him twice in public. But Pedro doesn't want to catch a fade, because he knows his friend might end up in a stretcher, so he lets it slide. The newspaper guy's astronaut's son says he's gonna marry the girl, so now Pedro is down worse than he's been the entire movie, and he even has to take a picture of it. Then while he's being Spider Guy, he loses his powers again, and he's just done with life at this point, and he reads a paper claiming that he worked with Professor Octagon to rob the bank. Meanwhile, Professor Octagon is working on the project that did everyone dirty last time, so the girls talk to her friend about the wedding, but the friend isn't feeling it because she doesn't think the girl's really about her relationship, and once again, the movie's trying to make it seem like married people actually dick ride each other in real life. Then Pedro goes to the doctor, where he explains that in his dream as the Spider Guy, he keeps losing his powers, so the doctor turns into a psychiatrist and tries to let him know what he should do to feel better, and gives him some advice to chill out on being Spider Guy. That night, he has a dream about his uncle, and he tells him to keep being the Spider Guy, but Pedro's just trying to live life, so he's done with that. Then he puts the Spider Guy fit in the trash in the cut to make it official. So now Pedro's living his life like a regular person, and he's feeling himself, because he doesn't have to worry about 12's problems, and he's doing well in college now, and everything's lit. He even managed to show up at the girl's play, which makes the girl mess up, because she wasn't expecting that. Then Pedro and the girl are talking, and he tries to get with her, but she tells him that his window has passed, because now she's about to get married. He tries to tell her that he's a changed man, but she doesn't care, because he lost his chance. Then some guy brings in the Spider Guy's outfit to the newspaper guy, and he's fleeing himself, because he thinks he's responsible for the disappearance. So a bunch of randos getting their feelings over the Spider Guy abandoning them, and the newspaper guy embarrasses himself in the Spider Guy's fits, while Pedro continues to ignore the plight of the innocent. Then Pedro and his aunt go to see the uncle in the ground, and at her crib, she tells him that she thinks she's responsible. Then Pedro explains that he's actually responsible, because he let the guy that murked his uncle slide, and his aunt isn't feeling him for that. Then it shows Professor Octagon still doing his thing, while the friend's trying to find the Spider Guy, and Professor Octagon pulls up on the friend, and tells him to get the rare material. And when he refuses, he almost gets put in a blunt, so he agrees to help as long as Professor Octagon gets him the Spider Guy. And he tells him that Pedro knows where he is. Then while Professor Octagon is leaving, the friend tells him not to put Pedro on a stretcher, as if that's gonna do anything. It's some other scene. Pedro goes out of his way to save a fetus, because I guess watching your own kids isn't the wave anymore, and he gets told that someone else didn't make it, so now he's hurt. When he's in the crib, the landlord's daughter tries to get with him, and she gives him a message from his aunt. When he gets there, he finds out that she's moving, and she lets him know that she's cool with him after all that talking he was doing last time he saw her. Also, she tells him that she gave away all his comics, so that's lame. And some kid asks Pedro what happened to the spider guy, and he tells him that he quits, while the Aunt Loki makes it seem like she knows that Pedro's a spider guy. Then Pedro tries to see if he has what it takes to be the spider guy again, and he just ends up busting his ass. So the girl's with the newspaper guy's son, and the girl's talking shit about Pedro, and tries to get with her husband, but she's not really vibing with him. Then she meets up with Pedro, and she tries to get back with him, but of course now Pedro's back to being the spider guy, so he can't get with her, and he tells her that it's not gonna happen. So she tells him to make out with her, but before that can happen, a car comes through the window, and almost turns them into memories. So Professor Octagon pulls up, and knows Pedro, and tells him to get Spider Guy to a location, or else he'll do the girl dirty, and finesses her. So everyone is hurt, and the newspaper guy missed the Spider Guy was lit, until he notices the suit is missing, and he gets in his ass again. So Spider Guy and Professor Octagon throw hands, and end up on top of a train, and during the fade, Professor Octagon starts throwing would-be packs at him, and he has to save them. Then Professor Octagon messes up the whole train, and Spider Guy has to bail them out without his mask, and they all pass him around like the blunt they'd be in if it weren't for him. And when he gets up, they give him the mask and agree not to snitch on him. But Professor Octagon is back for more, so the guys in the train put their lives on the line. So Spider Guy has to walk up and get put out of commission by Professor Octagon. Then Professor Octagon brings him to the friend and gets the rare material from him. So when the friend gets ready to spark a Spider Guy pack, he finds out that it's really Pedro. And Pedro tells him what Professor Octagon is trying to do, and says that if he doesn't stop him, then the girl and half the city will turn to ghosts. Then the friend asks about his dad. Pedro doesn't have time for all that now. So Spider Guy pulls on Professor Octagon and tells him to chill out, but when he refuses, they throw hands. And he saves the girl, but it's too late because the experiment is working now. So Pedro tells Professor Octagon to chill out, but he still isn't going. But then he says a nice quote, which makes Professor Octagon change his mind, so that's cool. Then the girl sees him and knows he's Spider Guy, and he has to save her before she becomes a thing of the past. So Professor Octagon puts himself in a shirt to make sure that the thing that he started goes under. So I guess everything worked out, and Pedro explains to the girl why they can't be together. Then it shows the friend hearing a voice from his dad pack, and he tells him that he needs to get Pedro out of the way, so never mind everything working out. But the friend refuses and breaks something, and finds out that his dad was the Green Orc. Later on, it's time for the girls to get married, but she just pisses off the newspaper guy's son and goes to chill with Pedro instead. And she says that she wants to get with him, even if it puts her on the news. So now Pedro and the girl are able to pipe each other, and the movie ends with Pedro going as Spider Guy to attend to business. Overall, there's actually pretty heat. Like I said earlier, it's one of the most lit movies. I mean, not as lit as this, or this, but still pretty good. So you should have checked it out before watching this video, because I just told you the plot. The moral of the story is sometimes you need to do things, even when it feels like the world is on your ass for nothing. Okay guys, make sure that when you subscribe you hit the notification button, because that lets you know whenever I make a new video. And as always, thanks for watching.